I'm good.
Okay, we're recording now.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our presentation today. Talk a little bit about promotional examination process. We're going to kind of keep this in rather broad strokes for the first episode, and then the second episode we'll follow that up with more detailed information like arrival reports and a little bit of strategy and tactics, and kind of keep it generic because really we teach throughout North America, and it's amazing the differences between departments, particularly as it relates to the order in which you give an arrival report, et cetera, et cetera. So, but we'll deal with those topics individually, and today we'll keep at the higher level on either giving and or taking a promotional exam. So what's going to make you wire for success for that exam? Obviously, learning the process. It's amazing to me, and I've seen candidates actually fail an examination because they didn't ask the right questions and even understand the promotional process itself, particularly with regard to the detailed paperwork. There may be a bio or a resume required, and people miss those deadlines. I've seen candidates that actually did an excellent job, nailed a promotional exam on the practical portion, and were not promoted because their paperwork wasn't in order. You obviously want to start studying early, well in advance of the examination. And part of that learning of the promotional process is ask questions. What are we actually going to be tested on, and get some idea or some feel for it. Now, obviously, you don't want to get inside information, if you will, but most either companies that are hired to give the examination, or if it's done internally, will give you some broad strokes and good information if you ask the right questions. The key to being successful is have a regular study schedule. Set up a time 6 months in advance. Be consistent with that time. Get a group together to study, or at least a study partner. In the old days when you used to use index cards to study with, I still highly recommend them. But if you're going to have an examination using simulations, the students should invest in their own future, their own success, if you will, by building their own simulations. They're going to learn by doing, and they're going to get the routine down, because oftentimes I've seen some fantastic tactical people come into an exam room, and it's like a deer in the headlights. They've never seen a simulation before, or it's something they hadn't anticipated. I highly recommend, again, the students have the ability to build simulations. So, A, there's no intimidation. B, if they're building the process and they're articulating the things that you would see on a fire visually, regard to smoke, color, volume, density, velocity, fire, etc., they're going to be a much, much better candidate. If you're promoting to a company officer, captain, lieutenant, whatever, one of the things that helps you greatly with regard to studying is mentoring other people. Now, you certainly don't want to mentor the people that you're going to be taking the exam with. You may or may not. But, for instance, an engineer that is probably going to be taking that same exam a year from now, the more you mentor and help him or her prepare, the better prepared you will be just by mentoring other folks. So keep your family involved. It's going to be a rigorous schedule. It may take 6 months of a lot of your time. Have them involved in the process so you don't have stress or any other ingredients that you don't need. Okay, so why simulations? We know with regard to teaching tactics and strategy, size up, etc., that building those cognitive skill sets are critical. One story about simulations, and I'll the department, but it was early on in the simulation days, and the department chose to use simulations for their promotional exam. 3 candidates failed the examination. Their complaint was, you can't teach firefighting on a computer, and you cannot test, certainly, on a computer. They won the grievance, and the test was thrown out, and the department was required to do a practical evolution. The person in charge of the exam made the practical evolution the same as the simulation, the same building, the same everything was identical. In fact, they reconstructed it to the tune of about $80,000. But having said that, the interesting fact was the same 3 candidates that failed on the computer-based examination failed the practical examination. The difference of scores, and I'm thinking there were about 70, if memory serves me correctly, folks that were taking the examination. The difference in scores between actual live evolution versus computer-generated simulations was 2% across the board. So there's only a 2% difference in the score whether it was practical or whether it was examination. So that department went exclusively with simulations from that point forward, saving a lot of money, saving a lot of time. Simulations obviously will keep it consistent. If everyone has the same sim, particularly if the evaluator or the person or the proctor of the exam has timed events, they're going to be consistent with everyone else. I mean, 9 minutes is 9 minutes. What are you going to do the first 9 minutes on the scene, and it times out? It'll be consistent. It'll be unbiased. It'll be exactly what you need, and will avoid a lot of problems down the road. Feel free to, if you have any questions at any time, just jump in. I love a good discussion. Now, so prior to the simulation, you want to paint a picture of the scene. And when I say paint a picture, I'm talking about, Frank, I couldn't go out to where you are and give an exam without first knowing the resources that you have available, etc. So have a written description of that of the actual scenario itself, the type of construction, maybe do an aerial photo, where the hydrants are, and what resources are going to be available. Are you going to have a truck company, 2 engines, and a rescue? Is it a transportable? Is it an ambulance? Do you have a heavy-duty rescue that responds to fire? So have all the resources spelled out in advance of what that candidate may or may not use on scene. The next process, again, and this goes back to not having an individual's resources, SOPs or EOGs in front of you. So you want to develop benchmarks based on those emergency operating procedures. Does your department comply with 2 in, 2 out, or do they do a RIC or a RIT team off the bat? Do you always do a 360, at least when possible? What's the first engine assignment, etc. And again, you could decide whether you want to or do not want to time the actual events. Then lastly is they should have a templatized form in advance on how they're going to develop an IAP, again, and that is driven by EOGs in that department. If it's not a timed event or a video and the candidate is going to interact themselves, which is what I recommend, then you can react to their IAP via computer. So that's done with our flagship product. I can actually change the dynamics of the fire based on the candidate's reactions, or you can have it built in with SimsUshare to where you can also change just like you would a navigation button. So that kind of gives an overview. The biggest thing you want to stay away from is any kind of a legal issue. So number one, like I say, make sure people understand the process, what their expectations are, the fact that they're going to be using computer generated simulations and equally as important, let them practice with it. I guarantee you I can give you the structure that you're going to have for promotion. Give it to everyone. Let them practice with it. Give them that same scenario, their same building. Change the dynamics. The cream will flow to the top. So it's not like it's cheating by any means, but I'm not necessarily saying you should do that. I have done it, and people had over and over again in their studies, and the same candidates that were taught us, well, that didn't either practice with Sims or intimidated by it, didn't do as well. So a student should, again, invest in themselves. Have simulations available that they can actually build practice with. Now, when I was talking about earlier changing the dynamics, and this can be done either if you will. But let's say, for the sake of argument, the arriving company he has two engines, got a truck company, got a rescue company. First engine on scene is given their arrival report, does their 360. Sets up command on the alpha side of the structure. Now again, some departments, the first engine is going to go interior. Our department, the first engine company officer took command outside, so it's going to vary depending upon department to department. But the point I want to make here is the fact that you can adjust the dynamics of the fire. So you did a 360, and then now the second dude or the battalion chief comes in, and typically what would happen is our BCs would do a second 360 before they took command. So on the second 360, all of a sudden battalion chief sees this, and that changes the dynamics of everything. So whether if you're having battalion chiefs test, this is a good one to use. A scenario like that you can change on the fly based on, okay, that 360 is different than my arrival report. So the dynamics either changed, the fire got worse, or the person missed something on a 360. And this is not designed to throw them a curveball or any of that, but it is designed to have them think intelligently on their feet when the stuffing does hit the fan. And the same would hold here. I mean, is the first dude engine going to hit the FDIC? All of these components are FDIC. No pun intended there, Bobby Halton. The FDC or not. So again, depending upon their EOGs and SOPs. But this just sets them up for that pictorial view, if you will, with regard to studying for the and/or taking the examination. And again, this can be done by keystroke or by video, whatever. So obviously we have type 1. This is Columbia Southern University. I believe that's your alma mater, isn't it, Frank? Okay, now let's take another look here. Different structure, two-story wood frame home. When I mentioned on the earlier slide, paint the picture. This is kind of an interesting home in that it's a good size home. It's probably a mile to the closest hydrant. The access is a 2-rut road that's about 1/10 of a mile long. So it's difficult to get equipment in, and there's no water. And like I said, the water is a mile away. So this would be a written part of the written perhaps to so where they are and what their resources are. So again, let's stay. We're getting the truck in is going to be problematic, and secondly, and equally as important, is what are we going to do about our water supply? So all of these factors figure in, and the only reason I bring those specifics up is to give you an idea of what the candidate, to prevent a legal challenge or whatever, the candidate has all this information spelled out in advance. It can be, like I said, written or read to them orally, so they know that they don't have water and what they're working with here. Are they reading the color, volume, density, velocity of the smoke? Do they understand the flow path? That's a pretty big topic internationally right now. And again, it's SOP, EOG driven. Please don't make some of the mistakes I've made in the past, in that you develop a simulation and there may be a something like Dave Dotson's Art of Reading Smoke, which is a terrific program, but it was not part of our SOGs or SOPs. It is now, to give an arrival report of turbulent smoke. Turbulent smoke kind of even had our dispatchers' ears perk up. They knew you had a good working fire. So whatever your department's SOPs and EOGs are, test only on those. Now, a person may score extra points, with regard to clearly defining the smoke, where the fire is, where it's going, how long it will take to get there. We know just by looking at this that the beast is being fed from somewhere else. And when I say fed from somewhere else, that this structure is getting oxygen or air flow through it. And where is it coming from? So, a sharp student is going to pick up on that front door being open. Okay? But I can't emphasize enough the importance of being consistent and making sure that everything with regard to simulations are in the EOGs and SOPs. Same story here. I use this one quite often in demonstration. When a candidate sees this, it looks like a typical ranch-style duplex. Give arrival report, fire smoke showing on the alpha side of the structure. They do the 360 to the Bravo, to the Charlie. It still looks like, you're dealing with a duplex. You look here, there's obviously 4 meters, so we're dealing now with a, quadruplex. But more importantly is there are no doors here, or anywhere around this structure. So this is one to test on situational awareness, not only on tactically how we're going to attack this fire and how we're going to lay out our initial incident action plan, but this tests the students' skills on situational awareness, and I think it's a pretty effective one. I like to use something along these lines to show the fire growth. So an interior crew can be reporting back to the candidate via radio of what they're actually seeing. And it's important to think about the dynamics of this fire growing to where the oxygen is just literally caused the room to flash, and not flash over, but to be fully involved rather, with the temperatures about 1,400 degrees. All right, so some water's on the fire, cooling it or whatever. But the point we want to make here is they're getting radio reports now that the fire has literally just burned itself out because of lack of oxygen. Crews inside, how is that officer, how is that candidate going to respond to this scenario? We all know what happens when ventilation occurs, and now we have people on, and I recommend using your department radios when they're communicating with crews that are actually task-oriented, if you will, or using their assignments. So, having said that, once oxygen or air is introduced, we know what happens, and it can happen as early as 80 seconds. The point I want to make there, again, is about situational awareness. How many times have we heard on a scene, Chief, give me 5 more minutes, or I've got smoke banking down to the floor, and your folks are, 100 yards inside a building, or whatever. So does that candidate, is he or she astute enough to say, okay, perhaps I might want to rethink my tactics, or perhaps I might want to get them out of there. Perhaps I may want to control the flow path. And again, we don't want to get into tactics today, but we will in the previous episodes on actually building examinations, and I'll give you some scenarios to go with those, some samples. Another one here, arrival report, 2-story, again, ranch-style home. Everything looks good. They're developing the incident action plan, doing their 360. I recommend that you use the navigational buttons for one reason. That has the candidate, or puts the candidate in a position to where he or she is going to either do the 360 or not do the 360. Now, there's an argument to be made, well, I want everyone to see the same thing I disagree. I think it should be something that they physically have to do. And I'll give you a better example of that in just a moment. Okay. Do the 360, and they should start hitting those benchmarks. So my recommendation with regard to benchmarks, and I'll be glad to send anyone copies of what I use for both the company officer exam as well as the battalion chief's exams. You're going to have to tweak them a little bit with regard to resources. We were very blessed to have a department with a lot of resources. And I could put 3 inches on a house fire, a couple of trucks, and a rescue in very short order. So depending upon your resources, but these benchmarks that I have and used for years work out very nicely. Feel free to templatize it to suit the needs of your department or department you may be testing, and keep them consistent. It's not a bad idea for the candidates that are going to take the exam to even see the benchmarks. They're right out of the SOGs or SOPs. Okay, so one more here, and I think we will. And Frank, if you have anything you want to add to this, feel free to do it. Now, the argument is made that, and I'm sorry, Rick, too, any comments you may have. The argument can be made if I have a sim built and I video the sim, and the sim is going to run from A to Z consistently with every candidate, there's no wiggle room there with regard to challenging the examination. And there's some merit to that. And this would be an example of how that may unfold, where prior to the exam, SimsUshare simulation was built, screen shared. This was converted to a WMV file, Windows Media Format, and every student gets that same look. Now, it can be paused, obviously, during the process itself. But my preference, and I'm just giving you Jim Murphy's opinion, and that is to not have it be on autopilot. Here's another example of a video. If the student, did not do a 360, they didn't do a 360. So why should you give them a 360 automatically? Because oftentimes in the stress environment of exam or what have you, the candidate may forget to do a 360, may forget some of the tactical components from your SOPs and EOGs. And I'm a big proponent of helping as much as you can, but I don't think we ought to spoon feed people. And this is the one we just looked at previously, but it just kind of, again, gives you, well, I'm going to go to a different one here. There we go. This is a free city in America, some kind of a fast food restaurant. And we all know the line of duty deaths we've had in these things. So it's good to give one of these for some part of the practical exam. Common types of structures do you use? Well, if we look at, it's a % of our fires, between 76 and 78, I don't recall exactly, of our fires are residential. And so part of the promotional exam, particularly for company officer level, should include two things: a residential fire and or some type of fast food restaurant, or maybe a strip center, but something that we do commonly. I've seen examinations given from really some impertinent buildings that, I mean, industrial chemical plants that aren't even in that department's first, just to test them on their tactical skill. I think it should be a building, A, that's in your first due area, obviously, and then B, the most common things we're going to, and then define what a residential fire is. Is a 1,400 square home? Is it like Shaquille O'Neal, who just added 10,000 square feet addition to his? that is a commercial fire as opposed to a residential. There are that use residential tactics as part of their incident action plan. They will call it as if we're going to use residential tactics or commercial tactics. And I submit that might get you in trouble. So I don't want to get into talking specifics on tactics. But a large home needs to be commercial fire. So tactically, when you're testing the candidate, they should obviously respond. So a video here, again, this is restaurant, fast food restaurant in any town USA, and they can start, giving their walk around information, radio reports as they're doing so. Go back, establish command, identify where the command post is, and start rocking and rolling. The biggest, or one of the biggest fears or issues I see very often is just the intimidation factor of simulations. Going into that room and seeing on a 10-foot screen the residential fire that is either progressing or is already well involved, and the decisions that have to be made with regard to not only the resources and equipment that are on the scene, but also, sometimes it's like herding cats when you've got more resources incoming. So having them practice with those benchmarks and with those tactical worksheets and with the overall scenario and description of what their expectations are will do two things. You'll have a better prepared candidate, and you are likely not to have a legal challenge. Now, we know from experience that most examinations in one form or another get challenged by a student that either doesn't do well or whatever. But having said that, the consistency will keep you out of trouble. I can't emphasize enough, if a student is going to take a book or take a test, they're going to purchase a book of some type, whether it's John Norman's or whomever, for their promotional exam. Why not invest in yourself with regard to the software and build simulations, so when you walk in the room as a candidate or even as a proctor giving the exam, that you are totally familiar with it, you're comfortable with the software, you're comfortable, and you're more focused on the SOPs, EOGs, tactical worksheets, and then hitting the benchmark. And if you spell those out all in advance clearly, crystal clear, then it's going to avoid issues down the road. So I think I hope what I've accomplished today was to just give you an overview on some of my experiences with regard to both taking exams via computer and giving a heck of a lot of them, and then peer information sharing on those that have done the same. You kind of find some common denominators. Again, that residential being 76 or 78% of the fires we have is certainly something you want to add. And so I cover the point. I covered the overall broad strokes, if you will, and we will get into future episodes where we'll take each of these types of structures, and I'll just give some rough generic benchmark hitting incident action plan development on how you might want to test a candidate. So having said that, if there are any questions or any discussions or any ideas, I'm open to suggestions myself. I'd be more than happy to entertain criticism, suggestions, or questions. Okay, great. Well, I think we've got a wrap here, and I'm looking forward to the next episode. We'll be putting that on social media, and we will be dealing specifically with different types of structures, different types of generic strategy and tactics, and I think you'll enjoy the episode. So have a great day, and we'll be talking soon.